Hey, it's Kendra and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how I crochet this sweater, so let's get right into it. So starting off with the sleeves, I'm going to show you how to do kind of the front portion, which is a tighter hem. So start off by making a slip knot. I show you slowly here, and then you can go ahead and put the slip knot on your needle and tighten it as you see fit. But yeah, we're going to start on the first row. I keep the chains pretty tight because I want this front portion of the sleeve to be nice and tight to my wrist. And just a little disclaimer for this video, I'm not going to do the basics of crocheting. I guess I'm just making this kind of assuming you know already how to crochet. If you guys want me to do more basics for crocheting, let me know in the comments down below, but I'm sure there are a ton of videos out there showing you how to crochet. But yeah, and of course if you have any questions you can leave them down in the comments below and I will do my best to give you some advice for crocheting. So after you finish the first row, you're going to move on to the second, and you actually just go back into the stitch next to the one that you just did, and we're going to do a half double crochet for this row, and for the rest of them here on out. And if you've never done half double crochet, it's pretty simple. You just yarn over before you go into the stitch, and then pull it through, yarn over again, then pull it through all of the loops. Yeah, it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. So I did this while I was watching a movie, and it becomes pretty mindless. Alright, and when you are approaching the end of your second row, for the very last one, just do it as normal, and then you're going to stitch an extra loop and then go back into the third row. And for the next row, and for all of them here on out, you're going to go into the back stitch. So the row, or the stitch that's kind of like farthest away from you, if that makes sense, because it's going to create this really nice texture. I did this for all of the hems, and I really love how it turned out. So after you do a couple of rows, you'll start to see the pattern. But yeah, just go into the loop that's farthest away from you. And for the sleeves, I have this tight white part, and then I'm going to go in with a lot thicker yarn to do the rest of the sleeves that I did the whole sweater with. But I did want a tighter hem, I guess if you could call it, for like around your wrists. You can of course just go straight in with the big chunky yarn, but I prefer this look. Alright, so this bottom portion is done, so now I'm going in with this really chunky yarn, which I love, but now after finishing the sweater, I think I would have done not as chunky of a yarn, especially for starting out, adding it into the white yarn. It's really difficult, so just make a slip knot and go into the first loop, and this was so tricky to get this bigger needle in, so it takes a lot of finagling, and then getting the yarn back through the loop. But to start this out, you're just going to do as many stitches as long as this front portion is. So for me it was 16, so you're going to add in 16 stitches for the first row with this chunky yarn and just go all the way down. You might have to do some like weird additions, like for like a part that doesn't really feel like it should be a loop, but just keep going until you have 16, and it will be wider than this thinner yarn just by nature of being a thicker yarn, but we will start gradually adding in more loops as we go. So I sped through the first loop because it was terrible, but these next ones are a lot easier. I found the first one just to be really difficult because it's typically a pretty tight stitch. So from here on out it was pretty simple, but it's just kind of a lot of guesswork, but just try and count as you move along, and of course you can count at the end, but it is a little bit more difficult to count the stitches with this thicker yarn, so I did find it pretty helpful to count as I went along. Alright, so we are at the end again, so I'm going to do an extra loop and then turn my work and then go right into the row. So for the second one, it's a little bit more difficult to find this stitch with this chunky yarn. Like I said, honestly, I found it was a lot easier to just kind of feel the stitch rather than look for it with this chunkier yarn. And I did, again, a lot of counting. I did have to redo some rows because I added an extra one or didn't do enough. So yeah, just try and be careful with how many you do if you're using a thick yarn like this. And again, for this one, we are doing half double crochet. And I'm just going to continue crocheting until I get to the third row, and then I will show you guys how you start adding in extra stitches, because as a sleeve you want it to kind of go wider as you get farther up, so I will show you that. Alright, so I've finished my third row. I'm going to add an extra stitch like usual and turn my work, and then I'm going to go into the first loop and add in my first stitch for the fourth row, and then to create an extra one I'm going to go into that exact same loop and just do an extra stitch. So you're going to do this at the beginning and the end. It is pretty simple, and you'll start to see it as you continue down the row, but yeah, I'm going to fast forward through this row and then I'll show you how to do the end. So similar for the first chain, you're going to go into the last stitch, chain one, go into the exact same stitch, and then chain another. And then once you're done with that, you just do an extra chain for that row, and then turn your work, and just continue on. So to create like the tapered effect, I didn't add an extra stitch on each row. You can if you want, depends on how wide you want the sleeve. I did like every other, every two, just what looked right. I did end up making the sleeve way too long, you'll see later on in the video, so I did take away a lot of rows at the end. But yeah, just kind of try it on as you go and measure against your own arm, and go from there. That said, I think I did end up doing 19 rows, where originally I made my sleeves with 25, so just you can imagine how large it ended up being, so yeah, just don't make that mistake. And here is another example of adding in those extra stitches at the end of a row. I did it also at the beginning, but yeah, if you want to see it again, here it is. Alright, so now we are going to move on to the front panels of the sweater, and there will be two. I did do this originally and it made the front panel way too big, so I had to remake them. That was a big theme for this sweater, was going way too large for everything. But to start these panels off, it's really similar to the sleeve. We're going to start with another slip knot, and then we're going to also start with the hem. So yeah, it's the exact same process as the sleeves. I just used this blue color since my thick yarn is like a tricolor. There might even be 4 colors in there. And for my first row, I chained 8, so then it'll be actually 7 long, because in the first row, your last chain kind of gets tacked on to the second row. Alright, and we are at the end of the second row, so I'm going to do 1 extra chain and turn my work, and then again here we're going to be going into the back stitch rather than both of them, just to create this really cool effect. And for the hem, for the front panels, I'm not doing a half double crochet, I'm just doing a regular one, because that's how I did the back panel as well. I'm just going to continue until I have, I think I did 12 rows for the hem on this one. So yeah, I'm just going to zoom through that. Alright, so now that that is done, it's time to add in the chunky yarn. So I'm going to do another slip knot and then put that on my needle. And again, I'm using this bigger needle size since this is a chunkier yarn. So it is a little bit tricky getting that into these blue loops. The blue yarn is actually a lot looser than the white yarn, so this part was a lot easier. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and work down, and for this one, again, I am doing half double crochet for this thicker yarn. Approaching the end, so I'm going to put in the last chain, and then I'm going to do an extra chain and turn my work and start in on the second row. So again, yeah, it's a little more difficult finding these chains, so just use your fingers and kind of feel out as best you can, but counting is your best friend for this. That's how I kept all of my rows even. It is kind of a pain, but you get into the zone, and again, I watched a movie while doing this, many movies, because this sweater took forever, but yeah, you'll get the hang of it. So before I stitched it all together, I did tie it together just with some loose pieces of yarn. And I'm so glad I did, because I realized it was absolutely gigantic on me, and the sleeves were ridiculous, the back was so poofy. So I did end up cutting some off after I stitched it, which kind of was a pain and really messy. So don't make my mistake and measure it out better. So stitching everything together was a bit awkward because the sweater itself was too heavy to put in my lap and a little too big. So I laid it out all on my bed, and I just did a single crochet and put the two hems together. So put the needle through the top and the bottom loop that matched up, and just crocheted from there. Yeah, it was a bit awkward at first, but you do get used to it. And you can put the seams on the inside, but since I had to cut some of the back panel, I put all the seams on the outside, so the cut portion would be on the inside. I just made sure to match up the edges as I went along to make sure I wasn't making any mistakes. I did have to redo a couple of hems, which isn't the end of the world, but yeah, just kind of check your work as you go. And here is how the sweater turned out. The size is so much better after I trimmed off the back panel and made the sleeves a little bit shorter. I hope you guys liked this video and it was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below, and also let me know if you try this out. This is for sure cheaper than the ones that you can buy for like $400, but it did take a while to make, so good luck if you try this out. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!